Okay, right. We're going to kick off. I know a lot of people are still joining, which is great. Um, but as I'll say in a minute, we are going to have this on catch up for anybody who registered but was not able to make it on the day. So thanks everybody for coming out. Super excited to be here. My name is Tim Hatt. I work with the GSMA Intelligence Analyst Group. And this talk today, this webinar is going to be on AI inferencing in the telco sector. And super pleased to be here with our friends from NVIDIA, from Dell, and from AT&T, who are going to, be there for a panel discussion and bring their insights to bear, from their leading perspective on sort of what's happening and where this all goes. Because as everybody knows, AI is such a, transcendent topic across so many industries, telcos included. So how it's going to work, we are going to go, and I should just say some quick house notes. As I say, this is going to be recorded, so it's going to be available on catch up. We do have a Q&A function, so if you want to put in a question, please do. I will do my best to get that to the panelists when we have the panel. If we don't get time to answer it, live, we'll try and set that up to follow up offline. We've got an hour. I am going to start off for about 15, 20 minutes, just recapping some of the analysis we've done in this topic this year. We published a number of reports, and we built what we think is a pretty cool calculator that sits online for people to test out, what inference looks like in a number of different use cases and how that can be customized to their own business. We want to get more people using that. We've had a bunch try it already. We want to get more. So I'll talk for about 15 to 20 minutes on those two. And then we're going to have a panel, for about 30, 35 minutes. And as I say, if we can get time for Q&A interspersed with that panel, great. If not, we'll take questions and answer them offline. So you didn't come here to hear me. There are much smarter people on the call. So we got Chris Penrose, who is the Global Head of Business Development for Telco from NVIDIA. Manish Singh, who is the CTO of the Telecom Systems business at Dell Technologies. And then Mike Van Horn, who is the Area Vice President for Product Development and Management in the IoT domain at AT&T. So guys, thanks for coming out today, and great to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's kick off into the content. So we started earlier this year kind of from a blank canvas saying we think that inference running AI it really has a value proposition on the telco edge, and that there's a number of use cases that merit further look in that area. And the reason we started with that was that if you look at this network paradigm for AI, you can kind of think about it as AI helping networks, things like troubleshooting, making networks more efficient, cost savings. The other side of that pendulum is you can look at sort of how networks work for AI. How mobile networks and access networks and edge networks work to deliver on the AI promise and leverage their capabilities that ultimately can be monetized through kind of new or improved services. And so it's that kind of networks for AI that really, I think, is the genesis for a lot of what we're thinking about here. Now, when we look at sort of the telco, pipeline so far about where AI has been deployed, it's moving quite quickly. This is data from over 700 operators that we looked at across different domains of the business. And really the question is, if you're deploying AI in the network or in the telco cloud / data center, sales and marketing, or in corporate functions or wherever, how far along the curve are we? Everybody's deploying AI. It's more, where is the maturity of those deployments? And so you get to the point where actually a lot of the early wins have focused on, low-hanging fruit, customer care centers, automation, network preemptive maintenance. Um, and they've been focused primarily on efficiencies and cost savings. Tracks expectations. Everybody wants to do that, and there's long-running cost pressures for the telcos in many of these areas that AI can help with. The other side, though, is that increasingly we're starting to see AI deployed for a revenue objective. GPU as a service, edge inference, what we're going to be talking about today, customizing LLMs in foreign languages, and other examples. And I think that's really key because this is ultimately what the sector is trying to get at. Now that we're sort of past the halfway cycle of 5G cycle, really we need to use AI as a tool to drive that monetization. When you look at the edge specifically, and when we talk about the edge, I should say the edge is not one place. It's a distributed spectrum of compute, moving from a centralized source to a decentralized source, right out to the device edge. When you strip it back, though, I think there's a number of unique selling propositions for the edge that we want to call out, and particularly when you're in the AI era. So, distributing traffic loads, really getting compute latency optimized, figuring that out for what are very large load applications. Cost savings, TCO, long-running benefit for many areas. This one is certainly a crucial point for edge. As I'll go through in the calculator, we're seeing very sizable savings that has to be factored in. Resiliency, and then, crucially important, but perhaps not always talked about in the past, is data sovereignty. Being able to maintain data at source or in the country that's generated it in is really important requirement now, and indeed is a part of a regulation for many different countries. So all of that matters when we're talking about the use case for edge and why that should be in the in the discussion. As I mentioned earlier, there's different rationale for edge. Some of it comes down to cost savings. Some of it comes down to revenue generation. One of the, I think, hopefully useful ways of thinking about it is to kind of transpose that cost versus revenue motivation onto the different parts of the edge. And that's what this chart is trying to do here, this sort of 2x2, where if you look at the top, you have the enterprise edge, on the premises, and to the bottom, you're pushing compute power at the device edge. And then left to right, you have sort of use cases that are primarily targeted at saving money versus on the right, primarily targeted at making money. Of course, there's blurring lines here. These aren't mutually exclusive, but to help think about it, I think this is hopefully useful. And so when we've looked at our research and talked to operators so far on what they're doing, you see a lot at the enterprise edge: robotics, security cameras. We'll talk about that in the calculator. Digital twins in manufacturing settings. When you get into the cost savings, you have, I think Michael probably talked about from the telco example, sales and call centers, customer care operations, network maintenance, absolute fundamentals of operating a successful business, but things that cost a lot of money to run. Can AI work there? We're seeing a lot of deployments really bring that in. And this is hopefully a useful way to think about where different use cases fit along that compute and how to get clear on the motivation. It's a really important part. So we think it's sort of right place, right use case, rather than one necessarily winning out over the other. From an implications perspective, you then have to ask yourself, well, if you are an operator or a partner of an operator, what kind of network capabilities do I need to have in place to deliver on these use cases? It's one thing to talk about them. It's one thing to even have a good business case for them. But ultimately, if the infrastructure isn't there and the capabilities aren't there, it's not going to work in practice. This chart here is meant to be a visual that sort of shows, for the different requirements mapped to different use cases, what do we think, what do operators think? This is data directly from operators that we have talked to about this. What do we think happens to these capabilities when you're running at the edge in an AI? And you can see the shadings kind of give you a different perspective about where the speeds have to increase more versus less, and where the latencies come under pressure more versus less. Ultimately, though, what it matters is that these capabilities will differ depending on the use case. And so having an understanding of the requirements to deliver on the use cases is really important. I also come back to the telco USPs, compute latency, sovereignty we talked about, robustness and resiliency. All these things are foundational in delivering on the edge promise. And I think that's going to be a really important part of the conversation the next 12 months in particular, and really 2-3 years as AI starts to scale up through the business. We have published a number of reports this year. We published a big thought leadership piece back in March. We've got a slide with QR code coming up on that. We also published a number of deep dives looking at individual use cases, and the QRs are here if you want to scan these. These slides will be on our website as well, so if you don't get a chance to, don't worry about that. There's a lot of people in here, so don't worry if you don't get a chance to do it right now. The point here is really to look at, for different use cases, how do we think about the USP of the edge versus the cloud? Again, both the edge and cloud will have a place in handling compute loads depending on the work case, but it's important to understand where you get the benefits of the edge and how that varies. And so if you take an example, the network engineer agent stacks deployed to support telco preemptive maintenance and repair, you can see here that, for the edge, really has benefits when it comes down to energy efficiency, compute latency. When you look at, the cameras deployed in a retail premises or a transport hub, you see the compute latency really outperforms for edge because of the volumes and the need for very, very fast round trip there. You also see it for data sovereignty. So the selling points depend on the use case, but from a telco perspective, it's really helpful to understand these so that enterprise customers can understand how they're going to benefit from deploying these types of use cases. And we'll get into that in the panel. All right, so that's hopefully a good little primer to get into, the rationale, the use cases, how that splits out between costs versus revenues, and how to think about the positioning. The other part, and I mentioned this at the start, what we wanted to do with this work is design a calculator to help people simulate what kind of use cases and the benefits, be that from cost or be it from productivity, they can potentially have by deploying those use cases. And so we've designed this calculator, again, in partnership with Dell and NVIDIA, to give operators and enterprises and others a chance to simulate that. I'm going to demo it just for a few minutes in a sec, but the idea is that the use cases we have put into the calculator give a flavor for what could be deployed at the edge. But this is very much kind of something that we want to add on to over time. We're going to add more use cases. We can make it customized so that you can toggle inputs and outputs depending on your individual circumstances. We know probably use cases that are going to come in that we don't even know exist yet. So this is really meant to be something for you guys to try. So I'm going to stop sharing this deck for a minute, and I'm just going to pull up a view of the calculator, which hopefully you can see here sitting on our website. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes sort of giving you a little guide sort of demo about how it works. So what you've got are these three use cases here. One is the troubleshooting, one is the security camera and image analytics, another is an inventory management solution. these are just the first three. There are a huge amount of inputs that you can't see here, but what we've tried to do is create a simplified UI so that you can go in and toggle these inputs depending on the circumstance. So if I look at, for example, the telco troubleshooting, preemptive maintenance, you look at this, you can simulate the number of people involved in an operation and handling the troubleshooting. You can put in a salary number for these people, which of course will vary by country and region. And then you can select where you're going to inference it. When you do that, you kind of click enter, and what it does is it shoots you out a whole bunch of metrics that you can then interrogate based on your business and how that potentially looks for you. You can see here, the first level is sort of looking at the cost savings when you're working with out Gen AI versus with Gen AI. You can look at the productivity benefits. So in this case, when we're talking about a troubleshooting, this is things like understanding fault detections, it's preemptive maintenance. At a national scale, it can get into things like dynamic traffic shifting, depending on where congestion is forecast. We're talking a huge scale here that is enabled by deploying these types of AI agents. And then, of course, you can look at the TCO, whether you're running that at the edge, in this case, in the telco edge, versus in the cloud. We've got other data down here based on sort of cost. Of course, that will vary depending on the individual deployment. If I then just for demo's sake, up the number of FTEs and you click it, you then get a different set of savings based on the revised inputs you put in. So should hopefully be pretty easy to use. It's not meant to be super complicated. We've tried to do the hard work for you behind the scenes by putting in inputs related to GPUs, to device costs, to server costs, and a whole bunch of other things that sort of get down to granularity that help drive accuracy, saving, leaving you guys to just be able to put in these metrics. I'll do one other. So security camera, you could look at this in a retail premises, you could look at it in a transportation hub. This is things like identifying the risk of theft or other malfeasance or risks to a physical premises. Again, put in my inputs here, Gen AI cameras that are deployed. I click it, and then it shoots me out this dashboard again, looking at sort of ultimately first the productivity gains by having the solution in place with AI. The cost savings using Gen AI. So that's kind of level one, just AI versus or Gen AI versus no AI in there. And then level two is running the inference at the edge versus the cloud and how that varies, depending on the inputs you put in. Again, along with these costs down here for the different elements. So I just want to reiterate the point before we come to the panel. Really, this is meant to be something that you can try and use for yourself, but it can be customized. So as we look at these use cases, we want you to go in and be able to look at that based on your own circumstances. We also really value feedback. So if there are other use cases you think that would be valuable in this type of calculator, please let us know. We are looking to expand out the library. That's a big goal because we know that things are evolving rapidly, and so I think that's going to be a key priority over the next over the next year. So I think that's the main thing I want to say. Just a quick reiteration of the benefits. There's business case support here. There's technical support. Ultimately, this is trying to help you guys do your jobs better and help your businesses evaluate what we think are really interesting business opportunities. But ultimately, it's got to have an evidence base for it. So whether you're telco or whether you're an enterprise, both of those are key. We can skip over that because we went over the demo. And then, yeah, just super last before we come to the panel. I mentioned the reports before. These are the QR codes. This one on the left is the big sort of strategic overview we published in March. And then the follow-up deep dives, we call them spotlights, are there. And so you're welcome to take a look. These are all publicly available on the GSMA Intelligence website. So don't worry if you don't get a chance to snap the QR code now. All right. That is there for context. That's there to set the table. But the real people you came to see are going to join me now to try and put this into life. So let's move into the panel discussion. And Chris, Manish, and Mike, thank you again very much for joining us. We got about 35 minutes or so. And I want to talk about sort of three main segments. One, kind of telco AI rationale, how that's playing out, big picture, where we think that is headed, and specifically the edge use cases there. We'll talk a little bit about technology and enablers, and then we'll talk about commercialization. But Chris, maybe I can start with you. From NVIDIA's perspective, you're such a central player in the AI era. You got a purview over the telco sector. I mean, how do you guys think about, the telco benefits from AI at the edge now, and where are you seeing the greatest traction?
Yeah, so again, thanks so much for having me today. And I'm actually coming to you live from All In up in Canada, and it's the largest AI conference up here in this region. And it's pretty fascinating to kind of see how AI adoption is happening across the telco vertical. If I kind of step back and kind of look at the overall AI journey, perception AI is kind of one of the first AIs that's been out there for a long time. It was really the beginning where we were seeing AI being used, and that's really, obviously looking into video analytics, and being able to detect, detect things in images, and then we really had the big, kind of Gen AI moment was, with ChatGPT in 2023. And we began to see the power of the ability to actually use generative AI, and be able to apply this across virtually every part of a telco. Even feeding back into that perception AI, you're now seeing the ability to speak and talk to your video, and be able to ask questions about what you're seeing in real time, on these video images. So that's kind of where we were back in 2023. If you fast forward to really where we're at right now in 2025, we're really now moved into this area around agentic AI, right? And this is the main differences here are that you now have reasoning models that it's not just a one shot ask a question and get an answer, but you actually are now having multiple different queries being kicked off to reason through the question and actually give you an answer. And it's actually taking it takes almost 100 times the amount of data to use a reasoning model that it does on a one-shot model. And you're beginning to also see how agents are now working together to solve problems, right? So you now have got this, not only has reasoning come in, but these and are now acting on things, but now you're stitching together multiple agents to be able to do very complex, work as an ecosystem. And so, we're beginning to see this, and I do think there are really interesting implications, when we get into the edge, around, when you're kicking off multiple different queries, how all that's going to come together in the most performant, manner to solve the actual request and the inference that you're trying to do. And then if we kind of look even into the future, which we're going to talk a little bit about, and you had some of the use cases on there, is this idea around physical AI and really how when you think about robotics and you think about autonomous vehicles and autonomous everything. This is how the physical world is, going to be going through the exact same transformation that we've seen around text and speech. One of the interesting areas in all candor is, you know, when you're hearing a lot and seeing a lot from a telco perspective around also the desire to go down the path of autonomous networks, right? And also, I kind of liken it to, if you think of the network as basically the network will be a robot as well, right? And so, so there's lots of things, and I like how you set it up front. I think there's things we need to be thinking about on both sides of the equation. How can we make the network run even more effectively and efficiently by using AI with the network? And we've seen some very promising, use cases here recently about applying AI to drive spectral efficiency. Spectrum is the number one cost asset out there, and actually being able to drive efficiency by having more real-time, algorithms around scheduling effective use of the spectrum, that is very meaningful. And you've also then got all the different applications that are going to come over the top of, and ride on top of the network. And I love this story that I saw the other day, and it said, telcos, your next customer is not a person, but it's an agent, right? And so there's going to be billions of agents that are out there, right? That are going to be created and they're going to be working. And so when we think through all that, it's really important to say, okay, then how are we going to best orchestrate and actually inference all that activity over the networks of the future? And so we do believe that there are some leading indicators that just doing all inferencing in a centralized location is not going to be possible over the course of time, based upon not just candidly, one big piece is just power, and actually having data centers that can be large enough to actually even host all that traffic. But on top of that, then you have varying different applications that desire different types of outcomes. And if I'm asking AI to actually help me build a business plan for 2026, that can go off and bang away on the cloud and take days, if we want. But if I'm doing real-time call translation, and actually offering up the next best, offer, on a phone call, and maybe even doing that in between different languages for an operator, that all needs to happen in complete real time, right? And so I think we get. We really, and the sovereignty angle, to your point, is also playing out in a really big way. Again, being here in Canada, there's a lot more rules that are happening, in every nation, where they're saying, we expect there to be the infrastructure in our nation. We expect the applications and the solutions will be run within the country. And there's over 22 telcos that have actually publicly announced with NVIDIA about setting up this type of infrastructure and looking at it at both the centralized layer, but also in more of a distributed architecture and creating an AI grid for their countries. So that's kind of how we see it playing out, Tim. Right now, I'll turn it back to you. But telcos are leaning in a big way, right?
Yeah, no, there's so much going on, and I'll come to you, Mike, on the telco perspective. But first, Manish, I would just want to bring you in. You guys again see this from the telco and the enterprise angle. Where do you see this, things going at the edge, and why now for the edge in the AI era from your perspective?
Yeah, first of all, a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I think just building first of all on what Chris just shared in terms of the big picture within the world of telco. Before I talk a bit about enterprise, I see it as three key pillars. Network for telcos is important. How do we apply AI in the networks, make them more autonomous? The area where we see a lot of activity already started is around customer care, customer support, next best action, next best offer. So there's a second pillar, which is the customer care. And then we see it that there's a third key pillar, which is around monetization. And within that monetization opportunity, I break it down into two. One is the sovereign AI factories, a lot of the sovereign data wins, and telcos getting in to build GPU as a service, AI as a service, LLM as a service, RAG as a service, et cetera, to service those markets. And that brings me to the last piece in the monetization bucket that we are seeing is now opening up, which is the edge AI. And edge, I think somebody was asking the question of are we talking Etsy, Mac edge, or what edge? Edge is actually, I mean, this is the challenge with the edge is a broader term and it spreads across. You have the network edge, you have the enterprise edge, you actually take it all the way down to the device edge. And AI being a foundational technology actually is going to get applied everywhere. So you will have it on the service edge, you will have it on the enterprise edge, and for that matter, even on the device edge. When it comes to edge and enterprise, here's what we are seeing. Number one, you already touched on data uh, sovereignty. I want to bring a few other properties of data. Data has gravity, it also has security. In many cases, data has privacy. And the demand pull that we are seeing from the enterprises is how can I bring AI to where my data is rather than trying to move a lot of that data to where the AI is. And if you look at the problem space from that lens, the picture starts to emerge very clearly that there are a lot of enterprises. We talked about retail, healthcare, manufacturing, on and on. You touched on cameras. I can add things like IoT and other aspects. The point is, there's a lot of that data that is getting created in these enterprises, and there is a need to bring AI, as I said, as a foundational technology to unlock the value of that data. And therein then comes the use cases. And the use cases are many. You could talk about computer vision, video analytics. You can talk about generative AI. Chris touched on agentic. How do I do workflow automation, safety, security, on and on. That's where we see the opportunity from the enterprise perspective. And last thing I'll say is this. I think telcos, I believe, are very uniquely positioned, both from a sovereign AI perspective, they are the trusted entities, service providers in their markets, but also from an edge AI perspective, they are the ones who today provide a lot of the connectivity services. I mean, to the enterprises. Think fiber, think SD-WAN, think SASE, on and on. They are the ones who are providing this connectivity solutions to the enterprises. And now this opportunity with AI is there to bring connectivity along with computing and unlock the value of the data that's getting created in that enterprise.
Yeah, and it's a good point you make on the asset synergy there with the infrastructure already in place, and I think that's a point that shouldn't be lost in terms of the value of the business case here. Mike, let me come to you. You know, you look at the IoT sphere, which is in and of itself very, very diverse. How is AT&T thinking about this, and what are some of the early deployments you can say from on the ground that are, should get, that are working, and where do you think some of those maybe are coming in a little bit more medium, longer term?
Yeah, and again, thank you for the opportunity to be on such a great panel and an exciting topic. As a network operator, AI is like, the best thing since the internet. And so, we see 400 petabytes per day travel across AT&T's network. And there are studies out there that say that AI traffic will rival traditional data and voice in 5 years. And so it just gives us all the sense of magnitude of how big this shift is. And it makes sense, right? We all probably have friends. I met two this weekend who have conversations with their AIs while they're in traffic. some were useful and some were, casual. We have kids who have Chat GPT helping them do their homework, and so it's just more and more becoming a part of everyday life. But it's not just more data; it's different, and that's where the challenge and the opportunity presents itself. And so, of course, when we're looking at delivering Netflix videos, it's a very different animal to optimize uplink and address latency sensitivity versus just downscaling and optimizing video for delivery. And so our real challenge is to harness the power of fiber and 5G to make AI on our networks better, more private, more secure. And so like you mentioned, some examples that we have out there. One of just AI driving tonnage on our network. As you may know, we're one of the largest providers of connectivity for OEMs, auto OEMs in the United States. And, autonomous, while it's not here for every car everywhere, it's a big part of what our OEMs are thinking and doing. And they're training models using video on the vehicles. They have to get that video off of these vehicles. And so, driving some big tonnage. And then, you go from that to something like our project with Dell and Chasm Labs in Washington State, where we're doing intelligent intersections. And we're finding that we can improve both the quality of inferences at intersections. So think about wrong way driving, near misses and crosswalks, and other traffic pattern analysis. We can improve both the quality and the economics of these inferences, and it's really just about to the earlier point. Having a network that can make decisions and orchestrate where the inference happens, be it at the device, on the network edge, or in the cloud. And so, it's really exciting times. We're shifting from thinking about being the connectivity provider and a bit pipe to really and truly, and we've said this for a while, but this is the real opportunity. Being a platform and solution provider and having an ecosystem of partners like NVIDIA and Dell is really helping us accelerate that journey.
Yeah, no, that's super, super useful and insightful. Thanks for that perspective. And I can see a lot of people are starting to put questions either into the chat or the Q&A. Thank you for that. I'll try to get to one or two of those in a minute. First of all, I just want to come on to some of the to the technology piece. Not super in depth, but I think one thing, and Chris, maybe I can come back to you for this. Like, if we look at this, isn't the first time we talked about Edge. Edge has been around with Mobile Edge before. It's had different stops and starts. We're now in a position though where fundamentally, in with AI and Gen AI, things are different. But if you're a telco, from what you've seen from the operators you work with and are talking with, what are some of the capabilities that are needed to deliver on the edge, and specifically, where do you think there are still gaps that need to be plugged?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I think when you're going to do inferencing at the edge, obviously, it starts with having the right infrastructure, at the edge to do that on, right? So there's different types of compute and GPUs needed based upon different types of workloads and use cases. And again, if you're going to begin to deploy, an edge infrastructure that has the ability to do inferencing, out there, you'll need to look at making sure you've got the right compute infrastructure to be able to support those different workloads. Obviously, the second piece is that AI is unique in the fact that it oftentimes, may not be able to even be done on a single GPU, but you're going to need to actually be able to stitch together multiple GPUs to be able to solve a problem. And so those things will have to be networked very well together to actually have them act as one and provide the most performant cluster, to be able to do the best inferencing, performance. And so a lot of the inferencing comes down to size of models. So obviously, you're gonna, some of your larger models will have to take place across multiple GPUs. But you're seeing a big move more, toward a lot more smaller models that actually might be able to be, inferenced on a single GPU, and you've got trade-offs in both cost and performance on those things. But there is definitely an opportunity to and we see a big trend happening right now where we're able to hyper train, on very specialized information, an agent that can be very, very good at this one thing and make the model very small. So in order to do that, though, you've got to have the right software, to be able to stitch together and make those models, and then you also are getting into orchestration, right? So now, how am I going to actually, think through, how will I route, these requests, you'll hear a lot of discussion around intent-based routing, coming as we go forward. Is that how do I land, these things in the right place based upon what I'm trying to do and what it's going to take. And obviously the other piece that we're seeing a lot of, is particularly on the telco space, is you're going to see more and more going on to, the device. Okay. And so you've got, AI that's going to happen on the phone, but you're beginning to see two trends. One is, you're seeing, obviously there's only a certain amount that you can do on that device. And if you're going to have to go off board, then, where's the best place to go off board to complete that request? And so is that best situated, at the closest place to, where that device is? But you're also seeing, again, folks like, in Europe, there's these AI phones that are actually coming out that the entire phone is actually moved away from being an app-based phone to being, completely driven, off of, interfacing through AI. And I think as we begin to see, new phone designs, that are going to, and other types of products, whether they're pendants or whether they're glasses and the other pieces, they're going to be using the network. The AI itself and the interface, is going to, really be driving then a lot more use of using AI and agents to actually make things happen versus it just being, touching an app, right? And so I think those are the pieces I would say that we kind of see happening out there, Tim, that are driving the importance of beginning to look at how do we begin to build out this, all these sets of capabilities, in at the right level, and again, to ultimately comes down, inferencing is basically, taking the action, on a model that's been trained, right? And so, what do you want with inferencing? You want the lowest possible cost per token. You want, it to be secure, and performant, right? Those are the three things you need.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do we look at that, and how do the telcos create a way where they can check those boxes, in a way that others can't, right? And I think that's really the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think the USP, as you call out, point to remember in our minds is central. And the other side to this coin, Manish, is of course how you sandbox this, how you trial this, how you think about, we can build a calculator, but ultimately an operator will want to test this out in practice. I know Dell is a leader in that front and has created environments to do that. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you think, the testing environment and bringing some of these solutions to market, can work best?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. I think just building on a few things that Chris just shared, and then how do we build the whole solution? When it comes to edge AI, I think it's really important to first keep the constraint of edge in mind, because edge is not a data center. And it's one thing to put 1,000 servers in a data center and manage versus one server out 1,000 locations and try to manage. And not to forget that those 1,000 locations have space, power, cooling, all environmental, all kind of constraints. So building and hardening that infrastructure for the edge location is a prerequisite. Secondly, as you distribute this infrastructure on the edge, infrastructure lifecycle management and automation is a prerequisite. So we need to first make sure those boxes get checked. Third, to Chris's point, if you look from a model perspective, we know the models are scaling, and the scaling laws, though I must say they are empirical laws, they're still holding true, and we continue to see how good the model performance improves with the scaling laws. And that means the infrastructure first has to scale up and then potentially scale out to continue to meet all these inferencing requirements. And so once you get your infrastructure, your automation, you identify the right models, what are the right use cases? Because that's where the real value unlock happens. And in that regard, I mean, Dell, along with NVIDIA and our partner ecosystem, we've been very actively working in our lab, in our open telecom ecosystem lab. We call it OTEL. But think of it as a playground. The word open is very important. Telecom is very important. It's designed grounds up for the telcos. It's open to bring the ecosystem together and then realize the use cases. I think Mike touched on some of the work that we've been doing, for example, with AT&T on this whole, pedestrian use cases on walkway from a safety perspective and others. There are other kind of use cases for manufacturing, for retail, and others that we are working. But our goal is, again, within the lab, we're providing all the infrastructure, the underlying tooling, bring the operators, bring the partners in together, curate the use case quickly, and then start to take that out to the market. So these are some of the things I can go on and give you many examples, but that's the whole framework. And my request and call to action here to our audience is, if anybody has a great use case that you're thinking about, please talk to us, and we'll work very closely with you and NVIDIA and other partners to make that happen.
Yeah, that's exactly, and that's the, one of the big points of these sessions is to drive information awareness and ultimately engagement. So we got about 10 minutes left, and I want to talk a little bit about commercialization and kind of models and ROI, commercialization models, that is, and ROI. Mike, actually, just a double barrel question for you. I want to make sure we get at least one audience question in here. So one traffic question, then I'm going to ask you another question on commercialization. So somebody from the audience asked, to what extent do you view significant traffic challenges for operators from agent to agent communications outside of tonnage? Is this going to be spikier / less predictable, maybe more of a burden on the uplink, or any thoughts on that?
I think it'll be less predictable when you zoom in to certain geographies, but I think over time you'll be able to look at regions and be able to make sure that you have the right capacity at the right times of day. It's really, just another form of managing the network, and we're already, making investments in self-optimizing, predictive maintenance, and things like that. And so, some studies show that 60 to 70% of incidents from a maintenance standpoint or downtime standpoint can be handled by AI. If you think about it, 6 to 9% cost reduction, which is what that would equate to for a company the size of AT&T. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And so then you can plow that investment or that savings back into and reinvest in ways to have your network be more elastic to allow for agent-to-agent communication and trends like that.
Perfect. Thanks. All right. So my second question then for you, and this kind of transitions in the last few minutes, is within AT&T's business, like what do you, for some of these new AI driven or leveraged services, what do you see as some of the business models here in bringing these to market, and how should we think about the ROI question?
Mm. So first, from an internal standpoint, we're huge consumers of AI, particularly Gen AI. We have a really big application called Ask AT&T. We have 100,000 users on it, 400 agents, 2 billion tokens a day. So doing this at scale. But the key point here is this thing is paying for itself in 6 months. So our Gen AI deployments have 2x ROI in the first year. And so when you have payback periods that are that good and that fast, you can start to see some innovation happening. And so we have we get to meet lots of great innovators in the AI space, particularly with partners like Chris and Manish. And so it's really just about figuring out how do we pair the pain points that they have with the capabilities and changes we can make in the network to accelerate adoption of these solutions. So, for example, if any given hardware for a remote security application, makes the price point high, but we can move some of that compute to the network edge and bring down the cost, the total BOM cost of the hardware for that supplier. Now your market opens up to a much larger opportunity. And so we're seeing that over and over. It's about improving the economics, improving the performance. And that's how the monetization is happening.
Yeah, I'd like to add in on top of Mike's
Please.
comments here. I think one of the great best practices we see with telcos is that as you're beginning to apply, these technologies to yourself, there is also the opportunity to turn around and take some of those successes out as a solution to your end customers, right? And so I think this is really you almost kind of create almost a mini new product development shop of taking the different solutions that you've been able to benefit and see a huge return on, and be able to walk those right back out to your customers and say, this is, by the way, this is what we saw ourselves, so you should also believe me. That's the reason why you should take it. So I think there's a motion there around, how do you take, learn internally, but be able to then scale those things out. And that's monetization. The second piece that we're seeing is that, there's an opportunity to go back and really relook at your entire product portfolio that you're offering in the market and say, how could AI, potentially be added in to that type of solution, and give me a new version of that, or are there new AI services that I can offer into the market as well. And I'll give two examples of this. We're seeing lots of telcos begin to look at voice agents that could be in the network, and you think about like a replacement of an IVR with an agentic worker that could be sold out. That's definitely or how can I add on fraud detection types of capabilities based upon voice. So there's a lot of things looking at voice, and also on security, right? There's AI is really being applied in huge ways around how can we use AI to understand the security threats and be able to act on these things. And many telcos around the world already play in that space and can offer some enhanced services. So you kind of have what I would call some core products that are very adjacent and already in the portfolio that there's a right to play. And then I think the final piece is that there's then, if you aspire and you're doing this work, every other company wants to go down the AI journey, and you can begin to offer training as a service, inferencing as a service, actual in solutions, and even GPU as a service, as offerings in the market to make new money, new revenue streams as well. So these are all the different places that we see the telcos kind of leaning in to drive new revenue streams with AI.
Tim, if I may
And
just quickly,
yeah, please,
just maybe a
Manish,
quick
go ahead.
minute, right? I mean,
Yeah.
to all the great points that Mike and Chris made, but even broaden the lens a little bit to say that before we go and prefetch all the answers on ROI, we need to step back and look at the opportunity here very broadly, in my view. I think the world of AI, the biggest opportunity it's creating for any enterprise is productivity gains, better customer engagement for any enterprise. It's a
Yep.
very broad thing, right? And so when you are improving the productivity, driving better customer engagement, on and on, better customer experience, you're actually impacting the P&L of that enterprise. And
Yep.
therein lies a lot of nuance and work that needs to be done to understand the impact that can be created by unlocking the value of that
Yep.
data in the enterprise, and the business case starts to work its way very quickly in terms of. I'll just say one last thing, right? I mean, I know we're coming up on time. There's a good blog I just recently came across that McDonald's published, right? Now think about golden arches everywhere. And what is McDonald's doing in their golden arches? I mean, yeah, I mean, they're doing IoT, customer experience. There's another one from Lowe's. So I can go on and on in terms of examples. But the enterprises themselves are looking at what they need to do in their enterprise locations, where the data is getting created, and how can we unlock the value of that.
Yeah. And look, so many points there are super key, like the iteration, the fact you go internal, then external, then you come back and you iterate. It's not a linear journey. This is very much a kind of circular one that evolves. I think as well, Manish and Mike, the points there on bringing to market, really important. I saw a comment, it's the economic benefits. There's also safety benefits. I didn't talk
Yep.
in the demo in the calculator about
Sure.
the hospital use case. That's monitoring
Yep.
PPE, personal
Yep.
protective equipment. This is like direct connection to how doctors do their jobs and save lives. So this is touching so many angles, but we could talk for 5 hours on this. We could talk all day. I dare say we'll be here again at some point in the future, but I am conscious of time. Coming up on 5, and I just, I know people have busy schedules and things to get to. There were a lot of you here, I could see. But just to remind everybody, the recording of this webinar is going to be on our website. The calculators on the site, and the slides that were run through will also be available. If we didn't get to your questions, and I know there were a lot of questions, and I apologize we didn't have time to get to those all, we will do our best to respond offline. And most importantly, any thoughts or points of feedback or other ideas you have, we're always open to it. So get in touch anytime with myself or any of the panelists. We'd love to hear from you. But guys, that just leaves me to say thank you so much for taking the time and bringing such unique and insightful perspectives to the panel discussion today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Truly a pleasure. Take care.
All right. Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day wherever you are. Stay safe.